Welcome to News Inside. I'm An Jung-hyun. Once again, let's welcome back our panelists. To my left, I'm joined by Professor Shin Sang-hyup. Great to have you back.
Well.
As well as on my right, Professor Lee Young-um. Thanks for coming back. First, let's take a look at this week's 60-second news update.
The global rating agency Moody's Investor Service upgraded Korea's credit rating to an all-time high of AA2. The AA2 rating is the third highest out of its 21 rating levels. According to Moody's, Korea's credit upgrade was possible due to a sound physical stance compared to its counterparts. During a policy coordination meeting, the Korean government announced an activation plan for the selective working hour system. This measure will allow the employee to choose their working hours in order to focus on childcare or to pursue educational endeavors. The government's objective will allow 1% or more of the employees in all public institutions to use this system. Despite initial setbacks over the government's budget, the proposed 2016 budget bill has finally been passed. Next year, the government budget bill will see an increase of 2.9%. Consequently, numerous predictions are being made on the new policies and bills. The government budget for the coming year will set a course for economy's financial sector.
We have less than a week left of 2015, and with the new year ahead of us, many predictions are being made about the domestic and global economy. What seems to be the general outlook, Professor Lee?
Well, the global economy growth can be assessed by the recent UN announcement on the world economic prospects. They said that in 2015, the world economy has stumbled. They attributed several factors, including low commodity prices and instability in the macroeconomic aspect of the global economy and so on. And also that the emerging economies and the developing countries have not been doing so well, and they have predicted that in 2016 they will be doing a lot less well than previously, and that in 2016 the developed countries will actually be leading the growth in the global economy. The overall increase in global economy in 2016 is expected to be only about, or at a modest 2.9%.
Mm-hmm. Anything you'd like to add to that as an economist,
Yes.
Professor Shin?
Yes. If I had some more explanation about the global economic outlook for 2016, well, the United Nations forecast the economic growth rate of the advanced economies will be about 2.2%, while the emerging economies will have about 4.3% economic growth, which is about 0.5% lower than the previous forecast. Particularly, I want to introduce the forecasted economic growth rate of the major economies, including major emerging economies. In case of U.S., the expected economic growth rate is about 2.6%. But particularly about the U.S. economy, I want to add one thing, that is the very recently Federal Reserve raised its basic interest rate about 0.25% point. This can be a potential threat to the global economic recovery, because this means the changes of the USA's fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, if I had to explain about it, that means that all policies affecting the government income and the spending. The increase of the interest rate means that less amount of US dollars will be provided to the market. That means, well, it can be an obstacle in an effort to get recovery in the global market, considering the economic size of the US. And how about European Union? The expected economic growth rate in 2016 is about 2%. Actually, this is the highest one over the 10 years, over the several years. In fact, since 2010, this is the first time to have the higher than 2% economic growth rate. China, actually, this has been one of the countries, which have enjoyed the highest economic growth. Well, this year, it is expected to, China will have about 6.4%, which is the lowest economic growth rate over the last several years. How about the economic growth of the emerging economies? In case of Brazil, which is one of the largest emerging economies in the world, expected the economic growth rate is minus 0.8 percentage point, and Russia 0%, and South Africa also has is expected to have minus 0.8 percentage point economic growth rate. Considering all of this, as Professor Lee pointed out, the global economic outlook for 2016 is not very, very bright.
Mm-hmm. And amidst this, the Korean government has set its economic growth target in the 3% range.
Yes, the Korean government has set a relatively ambitious goal of 3.1%, which is above 3%. When considering that this year's growth was only is expected to be only 2.7%, it is relatively ambitious given the fact that the outlook for the global economy is not so good. But the Korean government seems to be determined to ensure that their goals are met by trying to boost the domestic consumption and supporting the exports of Korean industry.
How realistic is this goal,
Yes,
Professor
I
Shin?
think, well, even among the government think tanks or financial institutions in Korea, they are making quite different forecasts about the economic growth rate in Korea. If I quote the announcement made by KDI, which is one of the representative government think tank, they forecast the 2% economic growth in the 2016. But the Korean government announced the expected or aimed the economic growth rate in 2016 is about 3.1%. Mm-hmm. Well, as Professor Lee pointed out, that government emphasized that it can be possible by boosting domestic consumption. But many economists are really worried about so-called consumption cliff. That is that the dramatic decrease in consumption in 2016. But I think 3.1% economic growth seems to be a realistic one because the Korean government has recently signed the FTAs with big economies in the world, which means that Korean exports could be promoted. And at the same time, through the FTAs, Korean government can attract more foreign direct investment from the foreign countries. Well, I think very carefully, but I think that it will be possible for Korean government to achieve 3.1% economic growth in 2016.
Yes, we'll talk more about FTAs and their expected effects later on in the program. In the meantime, amidst these not-so-rosy predictions, the 2016 budget bill has passed, and we're taking a look at the national budget for 2016 right now. Tell us what it looks like to you.
Well, generally, there are several areas that whose budget has been cut, and there are other areas where a budget has been increased. The areas that had budgets cut were the military spending and administrative area. The area that saw an increase was the social welfare, and basically several things, but you can generally describe it as measures to increase jobs.
Mm-hmm. In fact, yes, that's what the Korean government was hoping for, right? To keep the economy on a track of recovery.
Right. In fact, the government will spend money mainly for creating jobs and stimulating domestic economy. At the same time, they want to stabilize the livelihood of the particularly low-income households. If I give you more detailed lists, which the government will increase, The area which government will increase on, make a net increase are society and welfare and transportation and logistics, and industry and energy and agriculture and fisheries, and culture and tourism and public order and safety. But there was a net decrease in the area, such as in general administration and reserve fund and national defense. And one thing which I want to add it up is, to stimulate depressed domestic economy, Korean economy forward-loaded about 68% of the total budget in 2016 in the first half of this year. Well, in fact, this is not the first trial. Actually, Korean government has used these strategies to boost depressed domestic economy. This year is not exception. Well, in fact, for the public sector to promote the depressed economy, the government spent very intensively a huge amount of money. Well, this is the fiscal policy actually, and considering the other major economies, they also have used the fiscal policy, to provide more money to the market in order to vitalize the depressed economy. Korean government right now take the step to other countries' policy. And this is one thing which is very important. And in fact, for the public project, by the end of March, the government is expected to spend about the 40.1% of its total expenditure, and then 68% by the end of June. So this is details of it. And another thing, in fact, I want to emphasize is the Korean government included some budget for new programs. Well, actually, this is very interesting, particularly in the society and welfare area. The government included quite new programs in it.
Yes, what kind of new programs are we talking about here, Professor Lee?
For example, they have set a budget for providing assistance to military personnel taking distance education online, which is new, and which reflects the need to support our military personnel as well as adjusting to the online society that we're moving into. Other things are things such as consolidating the various bank accounts of a person so that they may save on interest tax.
Well, we mentioned that the budget will be geared towards keeping the Korean economy on the track of recovery, and that means the government will have to increase spending. As this happens, there are obvious concerns that Korea's national debt could rise to worrisome levels. What do you think?
Well, in fact, when national debt or government debt reach to, exceed about 40% of the Korean GDP. I think this is too much, in fact.
That's projected to happen, though.
Yeah. So the Korean government, was asked, is it dangerous? It's too risky, isn't it? The Korean government officials says that, we are not the special in terms of the fiscal policy. As I explained before, many countries, even though USA government very recently changed its fiscal policy, but almost every economies in the world right now try to revitalize their depressed economy by using fiscal policy, which means provide more money in the market. So I think the Korean government actually change its goal in their fiscal policy. In the past, they want to keep the balance in their fiscal policy, but over the last several years, Korean government said no. We just try to revitalize our depressed economy. This is the first priority issues in the Korean the economic policies. So, which means the Korean government said, oh no, when we make the budget, we already know that we will have a minus the budget. Huge national debt. But I think 40% is too much. And then many experts is really about, I think the government should make some appropriate measures to stabilize the financial sector in Korea. Otherwise, we will have another wave of the financial crisis, which we had in the late 1990s. So what kind of efforts government should make? Actually, the government should have to control the total government spending. I mean, the government says that we are really concerned about the expenditure volume. And then we monitor it very tightly. So Korea has the most stable financial sector around the world. Well, I think, no, I think that's the statement made by the Korean government, but definitely Korean government should make the appropriate measures. For example, pay-go system. In fact, the Korean government says that when the government forced government arms organizations or government ministries, when they spend money, actually the government asks how they fund for the budget, I mean spending. This is a requirement. We call it pay-go system. I think this is a good example. The Korean government should have to consider how to make the fund for the needed expenditure of the government in 1916. Without it, actually, we cannot say the government controlled the total expenditure in 2016, which means that there will be huge risk in the Korean economy as a whole. So I think those kind of efforts should be made by the Korean government in 2016.
We have examined the 2016 national budget and discussed economic prospects for next year. Now let's move on to our next issue. Is it a solution to ease unemployment, or is it just a mass creation of non-regular jobs? There's a stark difference of opinion over the 5 government-proposed labor reform bills. Let's discuss this in detail with our panelists. So the arguments for and against these 5 bills are very clear. Can you lay them down for us?
Well, before we talk about the pros and cons, I would first like to mention why these bills are needed. In the lagging global economy, and Korea trying to improve the competitiveness. There are several sectors in social structure that the Korean government is trying to reform, and labor is one of them. And globally, being more fluent or enabling more fluency in the labor market, I guess, is a global trend that needs to be considered also in the Korean market. And that was one of the reasons why these labor bills were instituted. Specifically, there are 5 bills, such as providing assistance for insurance, positive ones, but there are several bills that the labor force are very strongly against. And those are bills having to do with temporary workers and short-term workers.
Yes, it was difficult enough for the tripartite Labor Management Government Committee to come up with an agreement on labor reform itself back in September. Now, legislation is facing a huge setback as well. What's the reason for the holdup?
In fact, there are 2 major labor unions in Korea. The first one is FKTU. FKTU stands for Federation of Korean Trade Unions. Actually, this is the largest one, and they have been quite for the government policies. And the second largest one is KCTU, that stands for the Korean Confederation of Trade Union. And in fact, they has been very against the government policies. Well, there was, as Ms. Han explained, there was a tripartite commission. At first, both the trade labor unions boycotted the participation in this tripartite commission. But FKTU, they changed their stance. They joined to the tripartite commission. Actually, so owing to their participation, they could finalize discussion about the so-called labor reform bills. And but the main reason why they have had the big discussions and the problems is that maybe both sides, I mean the government and labor union, they have a different interpretation about the bill itself. The Korean government, well, actually, we should do that, to keep the dynamism in our Korean economy. But the labor union, particularly KCTU, they said that no, there are high possibility of misuse of this bill. That means that ruin the labor union rights, I mean workers' rights. The fundamental reason of this problem is the lack of mutual trust. Well, if they do trust each other, then we can find a solution. We can have those kind of, the cases in the foreign countries, particularly in the European countries. Well, in fact, the contents of the labor bill adopted by the German government is very similar to the Korean the labor bill. But they made it. Because I think it was possible because but the German government and the labor union, they had the high mutual trust. So the German government could persuade the labor union to change their stance. But how about Korea? Because the lack of the mutual trust. The mutual trust has been made in the past. Because of the relationship between the government and the labor union in the past, made the labor union not to have the trust about government, the policy itself. But I think this is the high time for us, for the Korean government, to change the relationship between the government and the labor union. Otherwise, we will be loser in the competition happening around the world.
Well, it seems like the tripartite committee agreed on a big picture, that is labor reform, but they failed to have follow-up discussions with the labor sector on how they're going to go about drawing up the details of the bills.
Exactly. Of the 5 bills, two bills that having to do with the short-term employment and the non-regular workers were bills that were very contentious. And when the labor union participated in the tripartite discussions, they had agreed to engage in further discussion to kind of sort things out. But unfortunately, the government, because it was in a hurry, it felt an urgent need. The urgency of having to improve the economy was so great that they tried to push for the passage of the 5 bills without much further discussion. And so in the end, the labor union that participated later retracted their support. And so that is the sort of the unfortunate situation between the government and the labor union and the contention. Now, what is so contentious? Well, on the surface, it seems very productive. Because Korea has this sort of a seniority system where people earn more and more money as the years grow, sometimes they're not as productive. So the new bill proposed that the people with seniority would give up their seniority status in return for a promise of a stability in work. So they will be able to work longer if they agree to accept pay cuts. But now, there are some items that make these workers feel that the security is not as strong as the government is saying. And also, if they agree to take pay cuts, the government is saying that they will be able to create a lot more jobs for our youngsters. And the unemployment rate of the youth globally is growing, and not just in Korea, and so it is a global problem. And so that problem will partially be alleviated with that. But the kind of jobs that the bill is going to create is not, satisfactory, apparently.
Not regular enough, right?
Right.
Yes, I think when you look at the contents of the 5 labor bill, just before Professor Lee introduced so-called a peak wage system, at the age of 55, after 55 years old, they can get the lower wage, but with the money which they paid for the aged workers, the employers can hire young workers. Then that is the one solution to solve the high youth unemployment issues in Korea. On the top of this one, actually, this bill included the extension of our contract term for part-time workers. Currently 2 years, the contract term, according to this bill, is going to be extended to 4 years. According to one of the labor union leader who does not have trust about government policies, he said that government gives some the reasons to the employers to use or exploit the part-time worker system. That means that after they hired the temporary workers for 4 years, and they stop hiring them for a while, and then they rehire them for another 4 years. So it means that because of this law, the employers do not have any incentives to use the permanent or regular workers. They want to use the part-time workers. And the second one is that actually, according to this law, Korean seniority-based wage system could be replaced with the performance-based wage system, which means that in case of there are some workers, when they have the very poor performance workers, the employers can hire them, fire them. I think this is the different interpretation which some labor union leaders have about this new 5 labor bills. So I think if they trust each other, they could find a solution. But as I said before, I doubt whether there is the mutual trust between the government and labor union.
Well, not just between the government and the labor union, but also in the way in previous years the businesses have used this 2-year term rule for the part-time, contract workers or limited term workers. One of the reasons why the structural reform in Germany, for example, succeeded was because there was no difference in Germany between the regular workers and the non-regular workers. And so that is why people do not want to be hired as a non-regular worker. The difference is so great.
So once again, it boils down to the issue of trust. The businesses or management doesn't exactly have a clean track record.
If I add one more thing, as Professor Lee pointed out, in Germany, yes, there was no big differences in the treatment for the part-time workers. In comparing with for the regular workers. I think this is very important. In fact, in Korea, in terms of wage, in terms of the fringe benefits, there must be big differences between the part-time workers and the regular workers. So I think the government should try to reduce the gap. In the treatment for part-time workers and the regular workers. I think this can be the first steps which Korean government should take in order to finalize the discussion about the labor issues in Korea.
Well, in addition to those things that you mentioned, building trust and reducing the gap between regular and non-regular workers, some have pointed out Korea's unique business structure as an obstacle to labor reform, such as the chaebol run business structure.
Well, that's very important. Actually, this is also the differences between Korean situation and the German situation. In Korea, Korean government has achieved economic development over the last several decades in cooperation with dozens of the conglomerate. We call them chaebols. So we have different economic structure in terms of the economic development from the other European countries, particularly Germany. Certainly, this is one of the reasons why we cannot make a progress in an effort to solve the labor issues in Korea.
Well, it seems we all agree on the need for labor reform. Now we must reach an agreement on how it will be achieved. Let us hope for a wise solution that will end this debate once and for all. The ratification of the long-stalled Korea-China FTA has put a spotlight on free trade once again. There are also high expectations for a boost in exports. Let's examine the expansion of Korea's FTAs and their effect on the economy. So Korea's first bilateral free trade agreement was with Chile, as we remember, and since then, Korea has signed FTAs with more than a dozen countries and economic blocs. What's the situation right now?
Well, currently, with the beginning of the FTA taking effect with China, New Zealand, and Vietnam recently, Korea now has FTA agreements with 15 economic blocs, including the US and the EU. Since 2003, starting with Chile. And so Korea has been actively trying to increase its trade borders.
Yes, in fact, the 15 countries and economic blocs that we have FTAs with represent about 75% of the world market.
Yes, in fact, out of total global GDP, these are, FTA partner countries, Korea's FTA partner countries produce 75%. So it's huge. And then Korea is only one country which has the FTA with the big three economies around the world. We have the FTA with the USA and the European Union, and then recently, a few days ago, we had the FTA with China.
With China.
So I think, this is very important. And particularly, Korea-China FTA is very significant. There is the increasing demand for consumer goods, particularly high-end household appliances and fashion products and medical devices and recreation products. There are huge demands for these items in Chinese market, and Korea has the comparative advantages in those sectors. So I think this will be a chance for us to increase our exports in Chinese market. And secondly, China has the world's second largest service import market in the world. Actually, the estimated amount of the service market imports volume is $381.5 billion US. So this is also one of the very important reasons why we have to enter into Chinese market, and owing to the FTA with China, definitely we will be able to get a larger piece of cake in an effort to enter into the Chinese market.
So obviously there will be industries that will benefit from FTAs, but at the same time other industries could suffer setbacks, and agriculture and fisheries is one industry that almost always gets the short end of the stick. So for a while there was even talk of introducing a trade profit sharing system. How can we address these concerns?
It's not an easy question. Actually, the government announced that they have a plan to raise about the 1 trillion won, which is equivalent to $863 million in the name of Mutual Prosperity Fund. But I think this is not perfect. Just to provide some financial aid, assistance to them is not a good way. Considering the total volume about the financial aid provided to agricultural and fishery industries since 1994, when Uruguay round started, is about huge amount of money. But the average house income of the agriculture and fishery household in Korea is about 30 million won something. So nobody can say that it was very effective policy.
As free trade expands worldwide, mega FTAs such as TPP and RCEP are getting a lot of attention. Korea is preparing to join them as well. As we enter the era of mega FTAs, how do you foresee Korea's trade prospects and strategy?
Well, I think at the moment it's okay because they're considering Korean economic structure, which is heavily rely on external trade. We should make every effort to have FTAs with more countries. Through FTA, actually, the Korean economy keeps the dynamism in it. Well, the global economic circumstances has been changed dramatically over the last several decades. What I mean is that in the past, by having a membership of the existing regional economic integrations in the name of FTA, we could gain something more. But right now, simply not to join to those regional economic integrations, we will have huge losses. So this is some important information we have to keep in mind in order to keep the dynamism in our economy. You know, if I tell you the very fundamental thing, well, the FTAs are regional economic integrations are based on the regionalism or bilateralism. This is against the basic principles of WTO, which is based on multilateralism. But considering the contribution of WTO system to each member country's economy, you know, the all around has been a deadlock over the last several years. So I think the member countries are seeking for the way, alternatives to maximize their national interest. That is the FTA. So we have to commit ourselves to have more FTAs with the more countries around the world. Particularly, as I said before, we have the only one country at the moment which has the FTAs with the big economies. So we have to use these advantages as much as we can in order to maximize national interest.
Well, some have pointed out, though, that yes, Korea may be doing quite well in terms of bilateral free trade negotiations, but we may be a little late in terms of seeking multilateral trade negotiations, such as TPP and RCEP.
Yes, Korea decided initially not to participate in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is led by the U.S. Initially, it was some people said that. I mean, Korea actually currently has FTA relationships with most of the countries in the TPP pact. So it is not going to be too detrimental to Korea. But recently, when the TPP was actually ratified and when it went into effect, I think Korea kind of felt that it could be missing out on something. So then Korea started to actively engage in the RCEP. But RCEP is not as strongly bound. The RCEP countries, which mostly include the ASEAN countries and so on, and so which is mostly regional. It is multilateral, but it is mostly regional. So it is not as strong. So Korea has actually been trying to use the FTA relationships as a leverage to participate more actively in the TPP and the RCEP.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Professor Shin?
Well, one thing. Well, those kind of multilateral-based economic integrations have been made not only by the consideration of the economic considerations, but also the political considerations. But considering economic structure we have, definitely we should make every effort to maximize the economic benefits, which means, I mean, of course, political consideration is important, but I think at the moment, the Korean government should put the first priority on the economic considerations when they make a decision whether they join to the regional economic integrations or not.
The global trade map is changing, and now is the time for Korea to come up with an effective strategy that will boost its competitiveness and expand free trade. That is all for this week's edition of News Inside. Thanks for watching. We will see you again next time.